My name is Leo. I work for Julian as his personal aide. I was 10 when I first started with him. Back then, my father was going to sell me to a local crime syndicate. Julian was the one who saved me. In my heart, Julian was like something from a myth, untouchable and perfect. I never imagined that even myths could come crashing down to earth. In the 24th year of Governor Vance's term, he publicly disowned his son, Julian, stripping him of his name and inheritance. Just a day before the family estate was seized, Julian had quietly handed me the deed to a small property. He told me that I was no longer bound by any contract to his family. He wanted me to be the manager of a shop he planned to open. I found it strange that he was suddenly interested in opening a shop, but I did as he asked and found the place. It was a small storefront with a small courtyard apartment behind it, containing 3 rooms and a kitchen. I was sitting on the front step of that empty shop, having waited for him all morning, when the news broke. He had told me he would come see the place the next day. I was his aide, his shadow. He'd given me my name. He was only 13 when he'd taken me in, but even then, he possessed an air of command that was undeniable. He had stood there in a crisp linen suit, an image of composed elegance. To me, he was a being from a different world. I never thought he could fall. When I heard the news, I locked up the shop and ran into the streets, asking everyone where Julian was. The whispers were all the same. He was being dealt with by his father's rivals. Not only disowned, but he was to be taught a lesson, a severe one. A lesson like that, I thought no one could survive it. I wiped the tears from my face and ran to the downtown district where the rival faction's headquarters were. After a long, desperate wait, the doors of an alleyway opened and a figure in a blood-soaked white shirt was thrown out onto the pavement. Julian. I scrambled forward, gathering him into my arms, my sobs choking me. He was unconscious. I managed to get him on my back and carried him, step by agonizing step, back to the little shop. I called a discreet doctor. Julian's injuries were severe, and a dangerous fever had set in. Apart from brewing bitter medicines in the courtyard, I never left his bedside. The doctor said the fever was the critical point. If it broke, he would live. 3 days later, Julian finally opened his eyes. He whispered my name. I was so relieved I started crying. He reminded me, his voice a dry rasp, that he wasn't a Vance anymore. I asked him if he was in pain. A few days later, when he was a little stronger and the fever had finally subsided, I would look at his healing wounds. My heart aching with a sorrow so deep it kept my eyes perpetually brimming with tears. He would try to comfort me, explaining that for all the brutality, they had held back. If they had truly meant to kill him, he wouldn't have survived. He wondered aloud who might have intervened on his behalf. I would just wipe my eyes and help him drink his medicine. The doctor had been optimistic, saying that as long as no bones were broken, he should be able to walk in 2 or 3 months. Julian had managed a faint smile at that. A pang of grief shot through me. He was still Julian, to be able to smile in a situation like this. It was a stoic grace, an unshakable calm in the face of ruin. But it was also a kindness. I knew he was smiling so I wouldn't feel so distressed. For the months he was recovering, I sat by his bed every day. I went to a bookstore and bought a few of the dense political biographies he used to read, and I read them aloud to him. When I ran out, I went back, and the owner recommended some indie comics and graphic novels, telling me they were incredibly popular. I thought about how bored Julian must be, stuck in bed, listening to me drone on about historical treaties and economic theory. Something to distract him from the pain, to help the hours pass. Maybe these colorful stories were a better choice. I asked him what he thought after reading for a while, and he admitted that it seemed to help take his mind off things, that the pain felt less sharp. There was likely an element of him just wanting to soothe me, but I believed it had some effect. It was better than him just lying there, enduring the constant ache. So I read to him one graphic novel after another, every single day. After a couple of months, he was much better, the pain having receded into a dull throb. I suddenly remembered the shop and put down the comic I was reading to ask him what kind of business he had planned to open. He told me the shop was always meant for me, a way for me to have a good life. He never expected I'd end up picking him up from the gutter. I told him the shop was useless to me if he wasn't there. Then an idea struck me, and I suggested we open a shop that sold these kinds of comics. Julian laughed. There was a question that had been hanging over me for months. Now that he was just a private citizen, I asked, was he still in danger? The worry had been a constant, gnawing presence. I hadn't asked before, when he was in so much pain, not wanting to add to his burdens. But I feared assassins at our door every day. For some reason, though, it had been quiet. Julian paused for a moment, then smiled again. He confirmed that the danger was probably still there. I told him I wasn't scared. I just didn't know how to protect him. I wished I was a trained bodyguard, someone strong. He laughed and reached out to ruffle my hair, a familiar, comforting gesture he'd always done, even though I was 17 now. Influenced by his calm, my own tightly wound anxiety began to unwind. One day I came home from the market and heard Julian's voice from his room, along with another man's. The man was saying that the Sterling family, their entire corporate and political dynasty, had been ruined, and he asked if Julian even cared. Julian's voice was cool when he replied that the Sterlings were corrupt, that they'd ruined lives and deserved their fate. The other man pressed, reminding Julian that they were his mother's family. Julian stated flatly that he had no such thing. The man accused him of still hating his mother. Julian repeated himself, his voice devoid of emotion. After a long silence in the room, Julian told him to leave. He thanked him for his help with the political rivals, for protecting him, and for arranging for unseen security around them for the past few months. He told him not to worry about him anymore, to just go. The door was suddenly flung open and the man stormed out. It was Caleb, the son of Julian's father's former chief of staff. He was Julian's best friend. He saw me standing in the doorway holding a basket of groceries, and his brow furrowed in anger. He shoved me hard as he passed. The force of it sent me stumbling back against a doorframe, and I slid to the floor, my head hitting the wood with a sickening thud. The basket of groceries tumbled from my grasp. I heard Julian cry my name as he rushed out of the room. Was I that useless? A simple push and my vision was already swimming in darkness. Julian knelt beside me, telling me it wasn't a simple push, that Caleb had put his weight into it. Before I could answer, the world went black. When I woke up, 2 days had passed. Julian was sitting by my bed, stirring a bowl of soup to cool it. He saw my eyes open and gave a gentle smile, remarking that it seemed the two of them were destined to be surrounded by medicine and soup for a while. He told me that after he finished his portion, it was my turn. Julian was always like that, warm and composed no matter the circumstances. Whenever I saw him, the fear and anxiety in my own heart would simply melt away. He asked if my head hurt. I nodded. He assured me it would be better after I ate. The doctor had said I was lucky to only have a concussion. He spooned the warm soup to my lips. I told him that I knew it wasn't my place to ask about his affairs, especially after what Caleb had said. But now, it felt like we were depending on each other. And if there was anything I could do to help, even just running errands, I wanted to know. He told me it had nothing to do with us, that we should just focus on living our own life. Our life. Julian said, our life. I lowered my head and swallowed another spoonful of soup. He promised he would make Caleb apologize to me when he had the chance. Half a month later, both Julian and I were fully recovered. I started thinking seriously about opening the shop. When he left his family's estate, Julian had given me $500 to set it up. But between doctors and medicine for both of us, we were down to about 70. I racked my brain trying to figure out how to start a business with so little, enough to support us both. To live our life. I tried to think of what skills I had, what I could possibly do, and came up empty. In the courtyard, as I was lost in thought, Julian sat beside me, shelling fresh peas. His long, elegant fingers against the bright green pods were a beautiful sight. I asked him again about the comic book shop idea. "All right," he said, his voice soft. I had been staring at his hands and was startled by his immediate agreement. I'd only been talking, thinking it was a ridiculous, baseless idea, but he had accepted it without hesitation. And so our comic book shop was born. Because of all the time I'd spent reading to him, I had become quite knowledgeable. I went to distributors and bought a stock of the newest and most popular indie titles to line our shelves. But we weren't just a bookstore. I also bought coffee, pastries, and snacks. Our shop was a place where people could sit, drink coffee, eat a pastry, and read. Not only that, but at a specific time each day, I would do a dramatic reading of what I thought was the best new book. Julian said I had a knack for it, like a professional storyteller. After we opened, the shop became surprisingly popular. We slowly built a base of regular customers. The readings were the biggest draw. People would sit at the small tables, sipping their coffee, listening with rapt attention. When they liked what they heard, they'd often buy the book. Soon I was reading for an hour in the morning and an hour in the afternoon. After the first month, I calculated our profits. We had made $10. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover our living expenses for now. I told Julian I needed to think of more ways to make money. He tapped my head with the end of his pen as I hunched over the ledger, teasing me for becoming such a little penny pincher. I rubbed my head, embarrassed. His room had a small desk where we would sit together in the evenings. He would read and I would do the accounts. For the past few days, I had noticed him with a stack of paper, writing and drawing something intensely. I asked him what it was. He told me it was a comic. He said he knew how much I liked them, and he wanted to try writing one to see if I would like his. My eyes widened. He was writing a comic? I eagerly leaned over to see. Just one look, and I could tell it was going to be brilliant. I turned my head to tell him so and found myself face to face with him, our eyes meeting. We were so close that when I turned, my lips brushed against his cheek. I pulled back quickly, worried he would be disgusted by my clumsiness. As it turned out, it wasn't just me who loved Julian's comic. The shop's customers adored it. When I read from his story, everyone would declare it a masterpiece. They ordered more coffee, more pastries. After I finished a chapter, they'd be desperate for more. The reading sessions grew longer and longer until I was practically performing from morning till night. Julian was constantly brewing me hot tea with honey, telling me not to strain my voice. But it was all cash in the register. I'd protest happily as I counted the day's earnings in the evening. Julian would just smile and go back to writing. I told him I planned to take his comic to a publisher to get it printed. He asked if I thought it would sell. Of course it would, I said. Everyone loved it. And they did. Julian's first published comic was a massive hit. That month, we made $40. I thought that our life would continue on like this, peaceful and steadily improving. It was all I ever wanted. But I was too naive. A disowned son of a powerful man is never truly left in peace. That night, Julian and I were sitting at the desk in his room as usual. He was writing, and I was reading the pages he'd already finished. Suddenly, the window shattered as a bullet tore through the glass. Julian moved with astonishing speed, pulling me down and shielding me with his body. The bullet grazed his arm, drawing blood. I didn't understand. After so much quiet, why would someone try to kill him now? The next day, I understood. Caleb's father and his entire political operation had been taken down, arrested in a massive corruption scandal. The period of peace Julian and I had enjoyed was because Caleb had been secretly paying for protection for us. With his family's fall, that protection was gone. The wolves were circling again. I asked Julian what we should do. He said we would carry on as normal. But he started writing faster, his output doubling. I took all of his new work to the publisher. His comics became a sensation. That month, we earned $500. A month after that, Caleb's parents were given a lenient sentence of house arrest. But Caleb himself, caught in the undertow of his family's ruin, fell in with a dangerous crowd and ended up in serious trouble. Julian and I counted up our savings. We had $700. Julian took the money and went to get Caleb out of his predicament. The ordeal seemed to have changed Caleb. His volatile temper was gone, replaced by a deep, brooding melancholy. He moved into our other spare room and didn't emerge. Every day, I would cook and cautiously bring a tray of food to his door. Julian didn't try to counsel him, just kept writing his comics, telling me that Caleb just needed time. One evening, as Julian and I were working, Caleb suddenly appeared in the doorway. He said nothing, just came in and sat down across from Julian. From then on, there were 3 of us at the desk in the evenings. One night, Caleb finally spoke. He told Julian that he couldn't just keep living like this, asking if he knew how many people wanted him dead. Julian didn't even look up from his drawing. He asked Caleb what he suggested. Caleb proposed they leave the city. Julian replied that they'd be killed even faster out there. In the city, at least their enemies had to be somewhat discreet. Caleb grew frustrated, asking if this was Julian's grand plan, to just not die. My hand, which was mixing ink for Julian, began to move faster. A sudden surge of anger and impatience rose in me. I hated the way Caleb was always pressing Julian, always judging him. Julian had been through enough. Julian seemed to notice my agitation and gently placed his hand on mine to still it. Caleb saw this and grew even angrier. He spat out that when Julian's family fell apart, it happened overnight, yet Julian had found the time to protect a mere aide. He sneered that it was probably the only thing Julian had managed to do. Julian continued to write, acting as if he hadn't heard a word. Caleb, furious, stormed out of the room. Caleb's words echoed in my mind. So that was it. In that moment of utter chaos, Julian's priority had been to secure my future. I looked at his profile, at the focused line of his jaw, and felt a sudden sting in my eyes. He must have sensed me staring. He told me not to mind Caleb. Then, perhaps because I remained silent, he asked if I thought the same way Caleb did, that he was doing nothing. I told him no. I knew he had a plan, that doing nothing was just a matter of waiting for the right time. Julian looked up at me then, and a warm, knowing smile spread across his face. I saw in his eyes that he understood. He knew that I understood him better than Caleb did, that I believed in him more than anyone in the world. Unconditionally. Caleb didn't understand that, which is why he couldn't understand why Julian would risk everything in a moment of crisis for a simple aid. The next day, as we were having lunch in the courtyard, Julian spoke, his voice calm and even. He stated that Caleb had struck me before, and he needed to apologize. Caleb's chopsticks froze mid-air. He asked Julian to repeat himself, his voice tight with disbelief. Julian said it again, completely unperturbed. Caleb slammed his chopsticks down on the table, making me jump. He demanded to know why he should apologize to me, as if it was his right to strike me. Julian put down his own chopsticks. The atmosphere at the table turned to ice. I was too scared to move, to even breathe. In truth, I didn't blame Caleb. He was abrasive, but his loyalty to Julian was real. I was glad Julian had a friend who cared so deeply for him. I gently tugged on Julian's sleeve, trying to signal that it was okay, that he didn't have to make Caleb apologize. But Caleb saw the small gesture, and it only enraged him more. He slapped the table, shouting at Julian for defending me. He asked if Julian knew what people were saying about him, that as the heir apparent, he couldn't have weaknesses, couldn't have stains on his reputation. Julian simply replied that he wasn't the heir anymore. Caleb's temper tantrum was forcibly cut short. That evening, as Julian and I were discussing a plot point in the courtyard, several masked men appeared out of the shadows. They moved with vicious intent. Though Julian reacted instantly, pulling me behind him, one of them lunged, and a knife sliced into my left shoulder. I felt useless, a liability. Julian fought them, 3 against 1, keeping me shielded behind him. Hearing the commotion, Caleb rushed out with a heavy iron fire poker. Outnumbered, the attackers fell back and then fled. Julian and Caleb exchanged a look, then Caleb glanced at me before turning and going back to his room. They still weren't speaking. Julian helped me into my room and sat me on the bed. He unbuttoned my shirt to reveal the wound. It wasn't deep. His eyes were red-rimmed as he looked at it. He told me to bear with the sting as he cleaned and bandaged the cut. He asked if it hurt. I shook my head. He stroked my hair and sighed. We both knew what this meant. Marcus, his primary rival, was getting impatient. Governor Vance had 9 sons, 5 of whom were still in the political game. Julian had been the clear successor. Of the remaining 4, 2 were actively vying for power. The other 2 claimed to want no part in it, hoping only to survive and live comfortably. Today's assassins were likely from Marcus, but it could have been the other ambitious brother, or someone else entirely. But Marcus was the most probable, as he had been the one to orchestrate the original accusations that led to Julian's downfall and the ruin of his mother's family, cutting off all of Julian's support. The next day, when I went out to buy groceries, I was grabbed from behind, a cloth held over my mouth and nose. In that instant, I understood Caleb's words more profoundly than ever. A leader cannot have a weakness. I was taken to a dark room, and when the hood was pulled off my head, I sat on the floor, my mind racing with regret. I shouldn't have gone out alone. I should have asked Caleb to come with me, even though he despised me. Then I wouldn't have been captured, wouldn't be used as a weapon against Julian. But it was too late for regrets. I decided that if they tried to use me to threaten Julian, I would find a way to end my own life. But first, I wanted to see who was behind this, to see if I could learn anything useful. When the hood came off, I looked up at the man before me and froze. Governor Vance. My mind was a chaotic mess. I didn't understand why the governor himself would have me brought here. I belatedly realized I was in the governor's mansion and scrambled to my knees. The governor looked down at me, his gaze sharp. He remarked that I was the aide Julian had protected. I could only nod, unsure of what he planned to do. He commented to a nearby aide that I was rather handsome, his tone laced with something like mockery. The old aide bowed and agreed with a nervous smile. The governor mentioned he'd heard we were selling comics together. It was only then that I noticed he wasn't holding a state document, but a copy of Julian's latest book, the one that had been so popular it sold out 3 printings. It dawned on me that Julian would have noticed I was gone by now. Panic began to set in. The governor's voice was impossible to read as he said that I had led his son astray. To do this, I could only press my forehead to the floor, my heart pounding. I didn't understand his attitude toward Julian. It seemed he hadn't given up on him, that he still cared. So why had he disowned him? Why the brutal beating? Finally, he told me to go and to take something with me for Julian. He tossed a small, heavy object at my feet. I picked it up. It was a custom-molded metal keycard, heavy and gold-plated. A moment later, I was deposited back on a street corner, my grocery basket next to me. Julian was already out looking for me. I was still standing there in a daze when I heard him shouting my name. He ran to me, his voice fraught with urgency. He asked where I had been, if I was hurt. My mind was still foggy, and I asked him if he had eaten breakfast yet. I had been on my way to buy it for him when I was taken. Hours must have passed. He told me to forget breakfast and grabbed my hand, pulling me back towards our street, casting worried glances over his shoulder to see if we were being followed. Back home, he pulled me into his room, closed the door, and checked my shoulder wound while asking what had happened. He poured me a glass of water, the same honeyed tea he made for me every day. I realized then how thirsty I was, my throat tight with tension. I drank it down in one gulp. I told him the governor had taken me, and that he'd given him the keycard. Julian's expression shifted from shock to a deep, contemplative gravity. It was then that I also understood. If the governor hadn't secretly given the order, no amount of intervention from Caleb's family could have made Julian's rivals hold back. They wouldn't have dared. I asked Julian why, if his father still cared, he would disown him and have him beaten. Julian sighed, taking a long time to answer. He explained that his father needed to remove the Sterling family from power. To do that, he had to remove Julian first. Even if he hadn't, Julian would have been caught in the fallout, and calls for his removal would have been inevitable. When Marcus accused him of embezzling disaster relief funds, his father knew he was innocent but used the opportunity to clean house. The Sterlings were a rot in the state government. Removing them was necessary. My heart sank. Julian had been the sacrifice. At the time, I didn't know that the golden keycard the governor had given him would be the key to his return. A few days later, we closed the shop. Caleb and I followed Julian south to New Orleans. The official reason for Julian's disownment was the accusation of embezzling funds meant for hurricane relief. Julian said the key to overturning that was in the South. About 2 weeks later, we arrived. We checked into a hotel in the French Quarter. After we'd all settled in, Julian told Caleb to rest or explore, and took me out. The city was a vibrant, chaotic tapestry, utterly different from the stern, political atmosphere of the capital. I told him I liked it. He smiled, his eyes soft. He seemed more relaxed here, away from the capital. He asked, with a genuine smile, if we should open a comic shop here one day. The idea seemed like an impossible dream. I was still gaping when I realized he had stopped in front of a nondescript but elegant-looking building with a golden sign that read the Albatross. I didn't know what it was, but I followed him inside. It was a high-end, exclusive jazz club. We were led directly to a private room on the second floor. A woman, beautifully dressed but with a serious demeanor, entered to serve us. Julian produced the golden keycard. The moment she saw it, the woman knelt. "Welcome, sir," she said. I would later learn that the keycard was a token of ownership. Whoever held the golden albatross card was the master of this establishment. What I had thought was just a club was actually the front for the governor's vast, private intelligence network in the South, with branches in other cities. The governor had given the entire network to Julian. Julian was here to investigate the embezzlement case. $20 million in federal relief funds had been allocated for the disaster in Louisiana, but only $500,000 had actually been used. The level of corruption was staggering. Julian knew, and the governor knew, that whoever had pointed the finger at Julian was the real culprit. The challenge now was finding the proof. The woman, whose name was Serena, told us that one of Marcus's key associates was in town and would be at the club the next evening. The following night, Julian took Caleb and me back to the Albatross. We were shown to a room, and soon after, Serena led a man into the room next to ours. About 10 minutes later, another man entered. Serena served them drinks and then left, joining us in our room to listen. The club's clients didn't know that many of the walls were two-way mirrors with hidden listening devices. The voice of the second man was angry. He was complaining that Marcus wasn't planning on paying them what he'd promised. Marcus's associate countered that with Julian still alive, moving that much cash was too risky. The second man shot back that keeping Julian alive was Marcus's problem. He just wanted his money. He'd taken a huge risk for them 6 months ago and hadn't seen a dime. Julian, Caleb, and I exchanged a look. The man sounded like a mercenary. From their argument, we gathered that the stolen money still existed in cash. Marcus was likely trying to keep it all for himself. Our first task was to find it. After the two men left, Serena immediately went to work. The money was found quickly, buried on a large property on the outskirts of the city. As for the mercenary, a few choice words from Julian were enough to secure his testimony in exchange for protection for his family. At the same time, the Albatross network uncovered something new. Not only had Marcus stolen the relief funds, he was also training a private security force. Caleb realized he was using the money to fund his own private army. Julian nodded. He had suspected it for a while. It was likely one of the reasons Marcus was so desperate to get him out of the way. Marcus was arrogant, believing he had outsmarted Julian, but he didn't realize he had only succeeded because the governor had allowed it. Julian returned to the capital with evidence of both the embezzlement and the private army. Stealing relief funds might be survivable, but maintaining a private military force was tantamount to treason. Marcus was arrested and his entire faction dismantled. The political winds shifted dramatically. Officials began petitioning for Julian's reinstatement. On the day we returned to the capital, just after we passed the city limits, Julian asked if I wanted to go see the shop. I nodded. I had a feeling he wanted me to go, and whatever Julian wanted was always the right thing to do. He told me to wait for him, that he would be back soon. Caleb, standing nearby, looked like he was about to object, but a cold glare from Julian silenced him. I watched Julian ride away until he was out of sight. The governor had given his disgraced son a token, a mission, a chance to earn his way back. But on the day he returned to the mansion, Julian knelt before his father and said he did not want to be reinstated. The governor was incredulous, asking why he had accepted the mission if he didn't want the position. Julian explained that he had done it not for power, but to ensure the safety of the people around him. Without influence, not only he, but everyone connected to him would be in constant danger. His father's former chief of staff and his family had suffered because of their connection to him, not to mention the staff of his former household who had lost their jobs. At the mention of the chief of staff, the governor paused. He asked how Julian planned to protect them without power. Julian suggested that his younger brother, a kind and honorable man, should be the new heir and that he would support him. He bowed his head to the floor. The governor was silent for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice cold. He knew Julian despised his mother's family and so had never cared much for his inheritance. But now that they were gone, he was still throwing it all away. He asked if Julian had any sense of duty to the state, to the people. He told him to look in his heart and ask who was more fit to lead. His younger brother was kind, yes, but he lacked the talent and strength to rule. He demanded to know why Julian was doing this. Was it for his aid? He threatened to have me killed right then and there. Julian bowed again, his body trembling, begging his father not to, admitting he had spoken foolishly. He would return, he would be his father's heir, he would serve the state and its people. Once reinstated, Julian left the governor's study and ran, sprinting through the mansion corridors. He got on a motorcycle and sped toward the west side of the city. He burst into the comic book shop, shouting my name, searching every room. But the small apartment was empty. He collapsed in the courtyard, a chilling cold seeping into his bones, as if his very soul had been ripped out. As a spasming pain clenched in his chest, he dimly realized just how deeply that small, quiet person was entwined with his own heart. Why did it ache like this, as if countless vital threads were snapping one by one? My voice asking if he was in pain. My voice asking if I was useless. My voice wishing I could be a bodyguard to protect him. My voice suggesting they open a comic book shop. My voice saying I knew he had a plan. My voice asking if he'd had breakfast. Each memory, each word, each smile, each pale and worried face, each time his eyes had filled with tears, it all crashed down on him. I was 10 when I came to him, a small, thin child who had grown into a bright, beautiful young man. 17 now. 7 years almost never apart. He hadn't known when it happened, when I had become so important. And now it was all gone. Everything. For a moment, Julian didn't know how he could possibly go on living. The dream of a quiet life, of a comic shop in New Orleans, away from all this. It was all dust. He sat there, stunned, forgetting even how to cry. Julian? I was holding a basket of groceries. I came back to find him sitting motionless in the courtyard. It was a long moment before he finally turned his head. I saw that his eyes were bloodshot. Before I could ask what was wrong, he surged to his feet and lunged forward, wrapping his arms around me in a crushing embrace. The grocery basket fell, scattering vegetables across the ground. I hugged him back, gently patting his back. "What is it?" I asked. "Where did you go?" he asked, his voice muffled in my shoulder. I told him I went to buy groceries so he would have a hot meal when he got back. I pointed to the scattered food, telling him it was all his favorites, though it was dirty now and I'd have to go buy more. I asked what he wanted to eat. He just held me tighter. "Anything you make," he finally said. "We don't need to buy more. I'll help you wash these." He let go and knelt, gathering the vegetables back into the basket, furtively wiping at his eyes. I knelt to help him. In the kitchen, I stood at the stove while Julian sat on a small stool, feeding wood into the firebox. It was just like all our other days at the shop. I looked at his handsome face, warmed by the glow of the flames, and I couldn't help but smile. He smiled back at me. After a long silence, he told me we were going back to the estate. In the 25th year of Governor Vance's term, Julian was officially reinstated as his heir and returned to public life. His father's former chief of staff and his family were also restored to their positions. Caleb still disliked me, and I was still Julian's personal aide. Or rather, I wasn't. In the study, as I prepared his workspace, I told Julian I didn't want to be his aide anymore. The pen in his hand paused. He turned to look at me. I moved closer, trying to look persuasive. I wanted to learn self-defense, to be his bodyguard. I felt so useless. Caleb could at least help him in a fight. All I could do was organize his desk and mix his ink. Julian put down his pen and laughed. He asked who said I was useless, reminding me of all the books I'd read with him. I asked what use that was. He insisted it was very useful, that with his tutoring, I was more knowledgeable than most university students. I thought about this, trying to imagine how that could be useful. An idea came to me. I would take the Foreign Service Officer test. Julian was stunned. My contract with his family had been voided. I was a free citizen. I could take the exam. And he was right, I was more than prepared. He began tutoring me specifically for the tests. I passed the initial stages and the oral assessments. In the final rankings, I placed high enough to be offered a position in the State Department. But for some reason, I was given a foreign posting. At the airport, Julian came to see me off. I told him to wait for me, that I would work my way back to the capital as fast as I could. Now that I was leaving, I was on a path to return as a true asset, as someone who, like Caleb's father, could be a real ally to him in the political arena. Suddenly, for the second time since that day in the courtyard, Julian pulled me into a tight embrace. "I'll be waiting, Leo," he murmured. In the governor's study, Julian stood before his father's desk. The governor confirmed that I had been posted overseas. He looked up from his papers, glancing at his son. He told Julian to stop with the hints. As long as Julian behaved himself as the heir, he wouldn't interfere. He snorted, remarking that I certainly had ambition, his tone somewhere between annoyance and approval. He waved his hand, and Julian quickly excused himself. Julian went to the highest balcony of the mansion, one that overlooked the entire sprawling capital. He stared south in the direction my plane had gone and stood there for a very long time. His heart was a storm of emotions, yet at its center was a profound calm. He whispered it to the wind, a promise sent out into the vast expanse. "I'll wait for you."